By now, all of us know that winter is coming, and that's especially true for us here in the Northern Hemisphere. So all of my outdoor plants need to come in, and I don't want to have all of these small plants to be scattered throughout the house like they were last year. So I'm going to make a simple 3-tier shelf, and I want this to be made with half-lap joints, and I want to use hickory for the wood. To briefly cover the design, we have an isometric view here, a front view, and a right view, and a detailed view of one of these horizontal pieces. So half-laps are incredibly easy to make, which means these back pieces will be very easy. But we have a 10-degree front leg, which means all of these half-lap joints need to be cut at 10 degrees. And as you can see here, I have one of these horizontal pieces exposed, showing that there's a back half-lap at 90 degrees, a front half-lap at 10 degrees, and then while the dado stack is set up to make these cuts, I'm going to make a rabbet along the bottom inside edge so that the shelves can be screwed on from below, which means you'll never see any screws on the exterior of the project. Only fasteners will be visible from the bottom side. And that's it. So all of these frame pieces are 1.5 inch square, so I do need to laminate a bunch of stuff before I can even begin to cut the joints. Okay, so I completed the first bit of milling, and I say the first bit because I want to glue up what I have here and then complete the milling, just because it's going to yield more material. And as far as what I have, this hickory isn't the greatest cosmetically. It's nice, straight-grained wood, but it doesn't really look that great, which isn't that big of a deal. This is going to be a utilitarian project and not a piece of furniture. So it'll be all right. I've arranged all of these glue ups so that the grain is matching, and I should be left with some nice straight grain material that isn't full of any voids at all. So structurally this will be fine. These two pieces will be 2 matching legs. These 2 pieces will be 2 matching legs, and then this group over here will be 4 of the horizontal pieces, and then this group will be 2 of the horizontal pieces. I just need to glue everything together so I can complete the milling process and get all of my frame pieces to their final size. Now that I have a much thicker stock to work with, I can continue the milling process back at the jointer, milling 2 sides nice and square, and then go over to the planer to mill down to my final thickness, and then I'll cut all of my pieces to their final width at the table saw. When it comes to determining sizes for parts for projects, my favorite thing to do is lean on the pyramid principle. So basically, the base of the pyramid, the foundation of the pyramid is the biggest, the strongest pieces, and as you go up the pyramid, it gets smaller and lighter. So I like that same feel, and I want to continue that with this project. The obvious example of that is the bottom shelf is going to be much wider than the middle shelf, and the middle shelf is going to be much wider than the top shelf. And sometimes it's not the obvious things, but the very subtle things that will also add to that feeling. In this case, I have a 1.5 inch wide leg. So in the left to right direction, it is 1.5 inches. But I was also able to get 1 13/16 out of the assembled front and back direction of the legs. So the legs are the foundation of the pyramid. They're touching the ground. They're holding this whole thing together. It is the perimeter. Up from that is the horizontal pieces that will connect the legs. And these ended up being 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch square. So a little bit smaller, not much, but a little bit smaller than the legs. And then the obvious The obvious step up from that is the thickness of the shelves that will connect the assembled left and right leg assemblies. So just subtle things can sometimes add up to a big difference in the overall appearance of a project. I've got all my pieces milled to their final thickness and width, so now I can cut the back legs to their final length and then the bottom angle on the front legs. When it comes to making the 90-degree half laps in the back leg, it's a really easy and straightforward process, nothing to it at all. But the 10-degree half laps on the front, I just want to make sure that I don't screw up, and I want to just really ensure that there's greater accuracy here. So as a safety measure, I'm going to first lay out all of my joints with a marking knife, and that way I can get close and then do the final work with a chisel, just to make sure that these front half laps are perfect. Now, what I've done here is I've taken my square and I've clamped it down to my workbench to represent the ground and then a vertical axis. So the back leg I know is going to be vertical. I can slide it up against this leg of the square and push it down like so. And then I know, according to my diagram, the outside corner, the front and back distance of the legs is 15 1/2 of an inch. So from here to here, I've just lined up my leg at 15 1/2 of an inch and clamped down. Now this leg is clamped down just on this bottom side over here, so I do have to be careful not to bump it in the left or right direction, but if I interact with it on top, which I will be doing, it's not moving anywhere. And this angle down here is 10 degrees or thereabouts. I've set my T-gauge or T-bevel to that same angle at the bottom of the leg, and I'll use this in just a little bit to help lay out all of my joints. Now, according to my diagram, the bottom of the bottom shelf is 3 inches from the bottom of the middle one is 15 inches from the bottom, and the bottom of the top one is 27 inches from the bottom. So I've measured up those distances and made a line to represent where the bottom of each one of these pieces will be, and I've already cut these a little bit oversized. So now I just have to fit them. So let me change the camera angles to where you can actually see, because I am right-handed, and I'll show you how I'm going to mark these out. I've already marked the bottom one, so let's go ahead and mark the middle. And I've got my tick mark and the X representing which side of that tick mark. So if I line my square up and then line up my middle horizontal piece up against the square, and making sure that I have about 1/8 of an inch overhang. It's not critical that I hit the 1/8 of an inch mark, but just eyeballing it here. So that is the exact location of this horizontal piece, and just so it doesn't move, I'm going to put downward pressure in the middle only, and mark all sides of these joints. So 1, 2, 3 on that side, 1, 2, 3 on that side, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I know the half lap location in the back leg and front leg now, but I need to also make sure that I get the half lap location on this horizontal piece. So just on the bottom inside edge right here, I'll put a little tick mark, and I know that one's 90 degrees, so that's the only one that I need. This one up here on the inside, I'll put a tick mark on this side, and then one on this side, which it's kind of hard to show, but at this point an accurate marking is much more important than a camera angle. So I've got both of those, and I've also marked this board joint 3 and joint 4, so I'll put 3 and 4 on my legs. Let's roll this over twice, and I know that my tick mark right here where the knife is, slide my square into place, that is the exact location of the half lap on this board. And for up here, I'm going to use my T-bevel. So this is from tick mark to tick mark, which it is. So 1, 2, 3. And I know that this is the waist on this joint. So this should give me some nice accurate lines to reference off of when I hog out all of this material. I've got both of these done, and I'm going to go ahead and mark this one off camera again. I've got a dado stack in the table saw, and I've taken the time to dial in the height to exactly what I want. Now, I don't necessarily want a true half lap in this case, more like a 7/16 lap. Just less than half the thickness, and what that will result in is when the boards come together, I'll have about 1/8 of an inch proud joints. And that's what I'm going for in this case. I want to have a little bit more visual interest rather than flat joints all the way around. So I marked all my joints, so I'm 1/8 of an inch proud, and now I'm going to do all the half laps so that they are 1/8 of an inch proud as well. And then everything will be chamfered right before assembly. So I also want to make a note of the setup I have here on my miter gauge. This is just a regular 2x4 that I milled square on 3 sides. The top doesn't matter. And then also I have a sacrificial board that is screwed to the back side of the sacrificial fence, and that is in line with the blade. Now it's important that this board is a little bit wider than the blade itself, because the purpose of this is twofold. Number one, as you push the miter gauge forward, it acts as a dust shroud as the blade passes through the sacrificial fence. It keeps a lot of the dust down into the cabinet of the table saw where it belongs. A dado stack removes a tremendous amount of material, and therefore will stir up a lot of dust if you let it. So this is a dust shroud, but also as you do push forward, your hands shouldn't be anywhere near the blade regardless, but there is a little bit of a safety benefit because it does encase the blade completely. So it's an extra step that I totally recommend doing every time you set up a dado stack. It only takes just another minute or so to mill another board, but it's definitely worth it in the long run. So now I can cut the half laps, the 90-degree half laps on all of my pieces, making sure to stay on the inside of all of my marking gauge lines, or marking knife lines. The lower 2 half laps in the rear legs are in between 2 marking knife lines. So to make this as accurate as I can from the table saw, I'm introducing the wood just slightly into the blade, and then from there I can slide the material left or right to line up the dado blade with my marking knife lines, and then complete my cut. And do this on both the left and right marking knife lines for each one of those internal half laps. For the angled half laps, I'll rotate the miter gauge 10 degrees in either direction depending on the board, and make my cuts. Now, unlike the 90-degree cuts, I don't trust this 10-degree gauge to be exactly 10 degrees, so for that, I'm just getting close to the line, but not touching it. All of my joints are fitted, and I left everything on the angled side a little bit long, so I'll have to trim all those up, and for that I'll just use the miter saw because it's still set at that 10-degree angle that I cut on the bottom of the legs. Now, to find the equal spacing, this is just a regular contractor style pencil, and they're about 1/4 of an inch thick. So the center line of that is about 1/8 of an inch, which is what I want for my reveal all the way around, so I can use it on a reference face to draw all of the overhang marks. But as I was doing this little mock-up here, it dawned on me that I forgot to do the bottom inside rabbet on all these horizontal pieces. So again, luckily the dado stack is still set up in the table saw, so I'll cut those real fast before I cut these at the miter saw. I'm using my benchtop router table to put a chamfer about 1/8 of an inch, not a huge chamfer, on all of the long grain edges for all of the structural pieces. So all the horizontal pieces as well as the legs on all sides. Now I'm not using the router table to get the end grain faces because I just don't have much reference surface area on my router table, so I'll get those at the workbench just with a regular hand plane. As a final step before assembly, I'm using a smoothing plane to just very lightly clean up all of the exterior faces. Using a smoothing plane is a lot faster than sandpaper, and all I'm trying to do is remove pencil lines and any type of milling marks that were left over from the planer. Now with the glue up, I want to make sure this is very uneventful and everything goes together smoothly. There's a lot of joints in play, so I'm starting with everything fully assembled in a dry assembly, and I'll individually remove each piece, add a little bit of glue, and then clamp it back in place. I'm left with 4 decent size offcuts from making the structural components, and of those 4 pieces, I've got 2 that are long enough for shelves, but it's not quite enough for all 3 of the shelves. So between these 2 pieces and this final remaining board, I've got plenty enough material. At this point, all I gotta do is worry about mixing and matching the grain so it looks halfway decent. Half of my shelf material is that really dull weathered gray look like the rest of the frame, and the other half was from that last board I milled, and it has a little bit more red, a little bit more brown, typical of the heartwood and hickory. So I'm gonna have a little bit of color shift on my shelves, but I just made sure that the leading edge, the front edge, is the same on all of my pieces, with it being, with the rest of it looking as random as it could possibly be. I ran all my shelves through the thickness planer to get them down to the final thickness and clean up any of the little glue squeeze out that I had. And I also cut a 10-degree bevel on the front edge, and that 10-degree bevel will line up with the front 10-degree legs. Now I need to return the blade to 90 degrees and cut the pieces to their final front to back width. It's going to be a lot easier to apply the finish and also guarantee complete coverage along the entire project if I do that before the final assembly. So I've done all of the surface prep and I'm ready to apply the finish, but I decided at the last minute to apply some stain to a scrap piece and see what it looks like. This is American walnut, and this is an offcut from the structural pieces. I showed my wife and she likes it, so this is the route we're gonna go because happy wife, happy life. Okay, it is the next day. I was able to get a coat of stain on everything and 2 coats of water-based polyurethane. And I'm really not a fan of staining at all, but you gotta pick and choose your battles. I have to assemble this thing upside down, and because there are half-lap joints exposed on every edge except the bottom, it's not going to cooperate with me. So I'm going to clamp a couple of these homemade 90-degree blocks and hope, yeah, that'll work. Hope that it just stays up. So upside down and top first, which in this orientation is the bottom. I used 2 washer head screws for each shelf to attach it to each end of the frame, or each side frame assembly. And because these shelves are a solid panel, they're going to expand and contract in the front and back direction, and if I just leave these 2 screws in place and completely pin it, I'm going to have problems. The panel is going to shrink and cause cracking, or it's going to expand and cause other issues. So what I did is, after I had all of the screws located, I removed each shelf individually, and for the back screw holes, I turned those holes into slots. And that way, the shelves will be completely pinned on the front side and somewhat tightly pinned in the back, but still allow enough space or enough tolerances for the shelf to expand and contract and not cause any issues. Now, from this camera angle, you can probably see the screw heads because they are surface mounted screws. They're not countersunk by any means, but this thing is going to be in this orientation. And if this is the ground, you're pretty much always going to be at least, I don't know, 2 feet or however tall this is, 30 inches or so and higher. So you're never going to see the screws down below. So all that's left to do is put it in place and wait for my wife to fill it up. Hey folks, thanks for watching to the end of the video, and if you are still watching, then you might be interested in long-form content. If so, then I encourage you to check out my 2-hour and 26-minute video course on making this 2-drawer dovetailed box. The course covers every aspect of the build, and I included as many tips and tricks as I could possibly include while making this. So whether or not you want to make this exact same box or you just want to learn the processes involved, be sure to check it out. There's a lot of information in there. The end result for this project is a 2-drawer box that has through dovetails along its perimeter. It's got through mortise and tenon joints for the middle shelf, and each one of the drawers is constructed with half-blind dovetails in the front and through dovetails in the back. So if you are interested, be sure to check it out. I'll have a link in the description below. You guys take care, have a great day, and I'll catch you on the next video.